Trey, just want to thank you so much for doing this with us, man. Obviously, I'm such good friends with Clementine, and we just kind of reconnected recently with Tanner and Gulliver, and
Ah,
and she was talking about you guys with my company, Valley Mentality, that her whole family was a fan of it and stuff. And I was like, your dad and your mom are these like great creatives and stuff. I'd love to just chat with them and everything like this. So I thought this was the
uh,
perfect
yeah.
venue. Yeah.
Well, congrats on the Valley mentality of it all. I'm a particular fan
Thank you.
of the Van Nuys drive-in gear that I've seen, which is nice.
Would love to get you one too, if possible. I know Clemmy has one, I think, but
Latest
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
drop.
No, it's fun. It's fun stuff. It's very cool. Look. I mean, I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here longer than anywhere else I've ever lived. This is certainly my home, but I am passionate. I'm kind of geekishly passionate about LA history. So
Awesome.
that's one of the things that I sort of clicked with on your branding. It's cool.
Man, that means a lot just to hear that. My family, a lot of them still live out in the valley. I grew up there until I was 7, moved to the beach after that. Pretty cool, but still, I moved back there after college, and I was like, there's this, I love it here. And so I was like, I don't think anyone's ever like celebrated it quite that I'd seen. And I don't
No,
know.
it's like you and the Valley Relics Museum, which
Yep.
is just a great joint that I've spent some time at, certainly. And my buddy Danny Boy O'Connor, who is one of the founding members of House of Pain, the hip hop, jump around, jump, jump.
Nice. Nice.
He grew up in the valley here. We
Okay.
we like to joke that we traded places because he grew up basically a block or a couple of blocks from where we live now, and while I was growing up in Tulsa, and then he now lives in Tulsa, where he runs a museum that is connected to my youth as well, and
Yeah.
I'm here. So we've traded places, but he's the one that turned me on to the Valley Relics guys, who are a cool group.
Man, I've yet to go to the museum. It's
Oh,
the
dude.
coolest thing ever. It's only open like on the weekends, though, I feel like, right?
Yeah. They post pandemic, I don't think they've ever quite gotten back to like full operating status, but it is not to be missed. It's pretty impressive space.
I've heard from I've been trying to go with my dad actually for like a year now at least.
Shocked you haven't been there yet, Duke.
I
That
know,
happen.
pretty pathetic on my part. Not living up to my reputation. That being said, so for the the many listeners that we have at this point, this pod for one, Trey, is it's obviously called Hollywood Beginnings, and we're just trying to do something that Jacob's more of a director, I'm more of an actor, writer, whatever, and we just want to touch base with people who've like been creatives and done show business and see what inspires them, how they got their start, and something that would help us, starting out and everything. So, that being said, I want to tell everyone too, you're a prolific writer, producer, worked on CSI, 911 Lone Star now, recently, I just saw that, et cetera. It looks like you've done everything under the sun. Yeah, man. So you're from Oklahoma, you mentioned. I want to start at the beginning.
I love
Yeah.
that.
I am originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a lovely place to grow up.
May I say, by the way, I have friends. I went to SMU in Dallas
Mhm.
College. I have friends from Oklahoma, from probably Oklahoma City, and so I think a few from Tulsa as well, though. But so yeah.
Well, if you got to be in Oklahoma, Tulsa's the place to be in. No disrespect to my friends in Oklahoma City, but yeah, it was a great place to grow up, and my parents were both in advertising. My dad had a production company directing TV commercials for local and regional markets. So that was sort of like my little intro version of entertainment industry there. But then it was I mean, I always loved telling stories, and my mother was a writer who also did a lot of work in advertising. So like I loved the notion of telling stories. I didn't quite put it together for entertainment purposes until like so many people tell some version of this story, but until the summer of 1977. And that is when I spent all the money that I had earned mowing people's lawns that summer to see the motion picture Star Wars 11 times in a row at the Fox Theater in Tulsa. And that was sort of the first critical step in my evolution. Just that the notion that like, oh, wow, not only was I blown away by this story and all the production values, but it was really just like this epiphany for my young brain at the time of like, oh, this is a job that people have. Like it's like a community of a few hundred people that get together and build a world for the rest of the real world to enjoy. And that just was kind of mind blowing for me. I hadn't really, you grow up in a place like that, and you're certainly a viewer of all kinds of entertainment, but somehow I didn't put it together until Star Wars. It was just such a sort of had a lot of powerful impact on a lot of people. I know.
Can't imagine seeing that film at that time in theaters.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like it was, I again, like I said, I had spent most of the summer mowing people's lawns, and then I just was like begging my parents, please drop me off again, please drop me off again. And,
Wow.
Spending all the money I had earned on $2.50 tickets and popcorn. But yeah, that was the first thing. It was like, wow, that's something I'd really like to do, but I really couldn't see any way that would be a real goal. Like I just couldn't do that mental math.
Right.
What was your parents' view on Hollywood at the time, being that they were creative, but in a different market?
Yeah, well, it was sort of love and hate. Like, my dad actually learned to be a TV director or, directing commercials from being stationed in the Army in New York City. And he wound up working at what were the old Paramount studios that the Army took over, that the military took over during World War II. And so he directed like Army training films, how to use a flamethrower, that kind of stuff, And so he kind of he had through the military had access to like, much bigger productions than what he was doing in Tulsa. And it's been a little bit of time on the West Coast, but not that much. I think that they were, look, to the day my mother died, and still to this day with my father, like they just have always felt at home in that part of the country. And God love him for that. Again, it was an incredible place for me to grow up, but like I always had my eyes out here. I something about it spoke to me, called to me.
Totally.
I couldn't get enough of every TV show and movie. And but it wasn't till Star Wars that I actually thought, wait a minute, maybe this would be like something that I could somehow do. I still couldn't figure it out though.
Yeah.
Until my junior year of high school. And that is when Francis Ford Coppola brought Hollywood to Tulsa and directed the movie The Outsiders in my hometown. And I had done a lot of local theater and school theater and some local commercial stuff. I'd been in a lot of my dad's commercials. And so an agent friend of his in Tulsa, who mostly repped music acts because Tulsa has a rich music history, knew that I, was interested in acting, and he called me up and said, this movie's going to be made in Tulsa, and I want to set you up an audition for it. And so I went and auditioned, really as just a utility player. It was an open call for Socs. There were Socs and Greasers, if you're familiar with the Outsiders.
I am.
And an amazing book by Susie Hinton. And so anyway, I auditioned and I got cast as a Soc. And that meant I got out of high school for a couple of weeks, stunt training with the immortal Buddy Joe Hooker, who did all the stunt driving for Smokey and the Bandit and every other movie you can name in the 70s and the 80s, and is still a good friend of mine to this day. So stunt training, learning how to throw punches and take rolls and have rumbles and all that stuff. And then rehearsals with all these actors. And that I had no idea who they were, right? Like the only person that I knew was Rob Lowe. And that was because I recognized him from an ABC after school special that I'd seen. But, I had no idea who Tom Cruise was, who Matt Dillon was, Diane Lane, Patrick Swayze, Ralph Macchio, C. Thomas Howell,
Yeah.
Emilio Estevez, like everybody was in that film. But no idea who they were, but going through rehearsals with them every day and seeing the machinery of Hollywood. And it was an incredible experience. I wound up, with one close up and one line in the movie. Couple other rumble scenes where it's hard to pick me out in the rain, but really what was most significant about that experience, aside from the fact that, it maybe raised my stock in high school, socially speaking, really the big takeaway, the biggest, most important aspect of that was when the circus left town. And I suddenly realized, oh, okay, so now I've had a taste of what I wondered about after watching Star Wars. But apparently, if I want to continue doing that, I got to go where the circus is, right? Because the circus doesn't come to my town very often. Actually, there's a lot of production in Oklahoma now that never existed then. But at the time, I was like, oh, yeah, that was my second epiphany is I got to get out of here. So ultimately, that led to me applying to USC Film School and somehow miraculously getting in. And so I did 4 years of undergrad there and have come full circle on that experience because I've been teaching there now for going into my 18th year. So
awesome.
Must have liked it a little bit. Going into USC, was directing your first ambition after that acting experience, or what were you looking to get out of film school?
It's funny. I at first I did a couple of years at the University of Oklahoma, right, just to get basics out of the way. I thought at the time I was going to cover all my electives. What I didn't know until I got accepted to SC is at the time they didn't accept any transfer credit, so I had to start all over again. My parents were super thrilled about that. But the point is, when I went to OU, I took some intro filmmaking classes. Again, they have a much more impressive program now. At the time, it was literally one class. It was a husband and wife from the West Coast who'd relocated and were teaching a filmmaking class. And we had to make 16 millimeter movies. And somewhere through the process of making my first 16 millimeter movies, and this story will super date me, but whatever, I'm old and bald. Through A and B rolling and hot splicing and all that stuff that you used to have to do in the world of film, I realized, like, wow, I kind of hate that part. But the part that I really enjoyed was coming up with the story. And that was the part that I had always enjoyed the most, right? So when I got into SC Film School, it was specifically in the writing division. So by the time I showed up, I knew that was going to be the emphasis. And that's where it has remained.
At that time, was USC Film School already a big deal? Like, were you dead set? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm not that old, dude. It's definitely, look, let me be clear, because you certainly do not have to go to film school to build a successful career for yourself in entertainment. If you're going to go, and believe me, they don't pay me enough to say this, I happen to think SC is the greatest film school in the world. I think that has more to do with the fact that, as they are proud of saying, most of their faculty are still working professionals in the industry. I mean, I'm an example of that, and so on my very first day at USC Film School, I mean, I was fresh off the truck from Oklahoma. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about LA. On my very first day of film school, the very first guest we had in my first class was John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now and directed Conan the Barbarian and a million other things, a legendary writer-director in Hollywood. And not only was he a guest in my little class of 14 students, but then I walked him out to his car and stood by the trunk of his car in the parking lot, and he told me war stories for another 45 minutes. And that is what SC gives you, right? It gives you immediate access to an extraordinary array of professionals. And that is what, even though it took me a long time to pay off those student loans, that is what that was ultimately the greatest benefit. That and just extraordinary professors who wrote incredible films and television series and, had been in the trenches. So that was great. That's where I learned the craft, really.
My cousin, Tyler Van Patten, went to USC Film School as well. And he's a successful writer. He's written for a bunch of different stuff. But so you go to this prestigious film program. you hone in on a vocation, you're doing writing, and you come out of that program. And then what happened next? Were you feeling prepared for the industry, or and did it apply immediately? What was kind of the next hurdle?
No, well, I think it was Dorothy Parker that once said it took me 5 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
There was certainly some of that energy. Plus, because I was not one of those SC kids who went on his parents' credit cards, and I did work multiple jobs. One of the jobs that I had, which wound up becoming a much bigger job by the time I was finished with it, I had started writing copy for a local LA ad agency that was primarily focused on broadcast promotion and theatrical promotion. So I was writing trailers and writing and producing radio spots and TV spots for movies and for TV shows, which sort of became its own film school.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how Hollywood markets itself. Then I had a freelance company doing that. So I wrote a lot of trailers and a lot of taglines. Like I wrote the tagline for Home Alone, the family comedy without the family, and Home Alone 2. He's up past Home Alone 2. He's up past his bedtime in the city that never sleeps. And
oh, the irony.
The Mask from Zero to Hero. I won an unofficial Oscar from Entertainment Weekly magazine for the best tagline for Predator 2. He's in town with a few days to kill. It was that kind of thing, And
that joke writing translates to so much stuff, obviously.
Oh, dude, I mean, it's an incredible skill that I still use and teach to this day in the class that I teach at SC, which is called Pitching 101. To have to distill the essence of your idea, no matter how complex a feature or a series it may be, to have to boil it down to a sentence. I think I know that Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. And to be able to do that to your own stories is an invaluable skill, because once you've got it into a sentence, then you can always expand it from there. But it really crystallizes for you what it's really all about.
I try to do the same thing approaching an acting scene. Hey, I need to be able to boil the scene down to one line or an entire story, whatever.
Yeah. What's it all really about? What's it about emotionally? What's it about thematically? Yeah. So I was doing that. And it did help me finally pay off the student loans and all of that stuff. Ultimately, it started to feel a little bit like golden handcuffs, though, because I would spend my days promoting other people's movies and TV shows, and I'd be completely worked by the end of the day and not able to devote the time I needed to devote to my own work. Right. So I kept trying to push that ball. I kept trying to get things written, and then I finally got a break.
What was that?
It was the legendary B-movie producer Roger Corman had a brother who sadly just left us a couple years ago, named Gene Corman, who was also a producer. And Gene got a hold of one of my scripts from USC that had won a screenwriting award, and invited me to come have lunch in his backyard in Beverly Hills. So already I thought I'd made it. That was before they served me an egg salad sandwich, where I was sitting by the pool thinking, wow, I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. But he handed me a folder filled with magazine articles and newspaper articles, all of which he had collected that he thought might be interesting jumping off points into movies. And he wanted to know if anything sparked for me. And I flipped through this folder while I was eating my sandwich, and came across an article about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve along the Gulf Coast of Texas. And I had an idea for a sort of Die Hard-ish action film about somebody trying to seize control of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And so I sort of pitched him a thumbnail of that, and he sparked to that, and then hired me to write a script called Texas Tea that was based on that premise. But he was going to pay me basically $1.95 to write this script, and which by the way, I was happy to have. I had never been paid to write anything before, long form wise. So I was super excited to do that, but I was also, I think, smart enough in retrospect to to recognize, okay, I know what my value is here. I know what I'm going to bring to the table, even though I'm not getting paid very much for it. But I also know that I need representation. So before I said yes to his offer, I said, yes, I am willing to write this script for you if, assuming you're happy with it when it's finished, you will help me get the best agent you can possibly help me get. Which is how I wound up. I mean, my first agent was the head of worldwide lit at William Morris, and it was just out of that one script, which, by the way, never saw the light of day, was never produced, but it launched my career in a big way because it got me into an office that I wouldn't have been in otherwise.
And also, yeah, you're being talked about. You're working with big shots.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love whenever we have people who write, come on, I love like breaking down process and disciplines and systems. Are you still writing specs? Were you writing specs throughout? Has there ever been a point where you stopped doing that? Like, do you have a daily kind of habit that you work with? Or
yeah, I don't want to jinx myself, but I've often said when I stop writing specs is when I'm probably done for good. Mm-hmm. I've always got multiple things in the pipeline. Some of that is like a heartland work ethic where I don't relax very well. And so I just constantly keep generating new material. I also think it's obvious, but should be said anyway. The more you do it, the better you get at it in theory, even though somehow I feel like I'm doing it again for the first time every time. But I definitely have continued doing putting as much new product into the pipeline as possible. So initially, that was all features. I was all in the feature game, and I would sell pitches and get paid to write features that nobody ever saw, but that were paying my rent, and that was all great. And then all of that changed kind of at once at the same time. I sold an original pitch to Columbia, to Peter Guber and Mandalay, that was at the time called Nightingale 1, and it was a big, ambitious sci-fi epic.
I read about this. Sounds fascinating. Yeah.
It was a big epic, but I joked at the end of the pitch, because at that point I was already married, and my wife was a comedy writer, and I had not worked in television at all. I had only sort of been writing on her, TV coattails to a certain extent, watching her experiences on shows like, In Living Color and Married with Children and all kinds of stuff. But I joked at the end of my original feature pitch to the Columbia folks, and oh, by the way, this would also make a killer TV series. And they laughed politely. And then they bought my movie and they hired me to write this movie. So I wrote the movie of Nightingale 1, and then did a couple of subsequent drafts on it. And then just as it was about to go up the chain of command at the studio, I think it was the movie Starship Troopers was released, did not do very well. It was big budget sci-fi. And so the studio sort of lost their taste for big budget sci-fi. But thankfully I had cracked that joke earlier in the room, because then one of the execs who was in that original meeting called me up and said, "Hey, you made this joke about this making a good TV series, but I didn't think it was that funny, which is why I took the last draft of your screenplay and sent it to the president of UPN, which was a mini network at the time. Later became the WB and the CW. And they're really interested in talking to you about adapting that into a series." So that led me to writing my first TV pilot, which was called Mercy Point. And at the same time, because things had gone well, at least with the writing and the development of my feature, I got a call again from Mandalay, from Peter Guber, saying, "Would you be interested in potentially writing a sequel to I Know What You Did Last Summer?" And I said yes. And so they wanted to hear my pitch. And so I went in and gave them my take. And so I got hired. And so in the span of 7 months, not only did I get my first movie greenlit for production, but then Mercy Point, which was the first pilot I wrote, got picked up to series. And so all of a sudden, there you go. It took me 5 years to become an overnight success, but it was boom, out of both barrels at the same time. But it was actually, in retrospect, it was great for me because it gave me a shot. it gave me a rare opportunity to be involved in both of those mediums at the same time, to sort of compare and contrast and see what I dug more. And to be truthful, I've tried to keep a foot in both worlds ever since, and I love both mediums.
Yeah.
But there's no beating television. So, because, you know, like over here on I Still Know, like I wrote umpteen drafts, got it into production, we got the director attached, I worked with the director, got greenlit into production, and then that was it. I was never on set or on location for one frame. I had nothing to do with it. I was a gun for hire. That was it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, over here on Mercy Point, I didn't even know what the word showrunner meant at that point. And yet it's not just that I'm doing all the writing. It's, do you want the green coat or the blue coat? Would you like this actor or this actor? You know,
did they hook you up with someone, or was it just you?
Initially, yes. First, it started as a pilot presentation, and so I was partnered with somebody who had previous experience in that regard. Then he moved on to greener pastures, and I was paired with an experienced showrunner. And then for a variety of personal reasons, he wound up exiting the project right after we started production. And again, probably because at the time I didn't really know what a showrunner was, and because I was just young and dumb and full enough of myself to do this, I went into the studio, who was spending an enormous sum of money to make this TV series. And I just basically said to them, don't worry, I've got this. I had no idea what I was doing, by the way. I've since learned, but at the time I was just blissfully ignorant in the way that's probably required for those kinds of moves. Yeah. But yeah, so I wound up, you know, my first movie in theaters, my first TV series on the air, and then coming out of that experience, it was like, wow, I loved both experiences, but the TV was the most exciting, the most creatively engaging, also the most exhausting, but it's addictive. I knew I had to do it again.
And that show was a sci-fi emphasis as well, right? It was
it was
doctors. Right?
It was often referred to as ER in space. It was 23rd century space station hospital at the farthest known edges of the explored galaxy. It was humans and alien species serving medicine side by side with multi-species patients, and it has not been seen since then until this year. And it's suddenly, and I wouldn't have known this if somebody hadn't contacted me from a sci-fi podcast that wanted to interview me about Mercy Point, where all episodes are currently on Crackle, which I think is the Sony.
I know Crackle.
Yeah. So you can watch them all for free now. But
curious, yeah.
But that was really like a trial by fire and my first experience working in television, and I couldn't get enough of it. So after that, I wound up, you know, again, working both back and forth from features to TV, because my first produced feature was horror. You can imagine I was getting offered every kind of horror movie imaginable. And I'm sort of stubborn in that way. I have many friends who've been very successful by carving very clear niches for themselves. For me, I sort of stubbornly believe that life's too short to tell the same story over and over again. And my credits definitely reflect it. You know, I've written sci-fi and horror and Westerns and procedural crime and serialized soap and animation. And, you know, again, I'm sure a good shrink could point to the common threads in all of it. But I try to mix it up to keep things interesting for myself. And but the problem was, working in TV, I kept selling pilots. I kept doing, you know, lots of development, but I had not really had the experience necessary to actually call myself a showrunner. Because I didn't know what I was doing when Mercy Point went to air. And so that's what the gift of CSI New York was for me. 6 years and 130 episodes of that series. And it was the ultimate showrunner training school. The three extraordinary women who ran those original CSIs, CSI Miami, and CSI New York. They may not have had a lot in common, but one way that they definitely overlapped was their belief in the system of, once the script is ready, take that writer, even if they're a baby first-time writer, and throw them right into the deep end in a sink or swim model and tell them, go produce your episode. And I saw a lot of people sink in that process, but I was determined to swim. And And that's how I stayed there as long as I did. But it's really where I learned everything that I wish I had learned prior to Mercy Point.
I mean, I can't imagine. That is the perfect training ground, just the quantity of things and just having to just jump in. I'm curious, obviously technology was different back when you were at SC. Did you ever reconsider directing features? Because obviously, like you said, like writers are king when it comes to television, but have you ever wanted to take your script and direct it?
I mean, yes, but it's lowercase y. Yes, it's not there. I have so many talented director friends who, live and breathe for directing, and I deeply appreciate that passion. That's the passion that I have in staring at a blank page or a blank screen. I would much rather than surround myself with skilled and equally passionate collaborators when it comes to bringing those pages to life. I mean, that's like my very favorite meeting of all the meetings that are involved in making TV is the first one, the concepts meeting, where you sit at a conference table with all of your department heads and your director, and you've got your script in front of you, and you realize quietly to yourself that, if I hadn't put these words on these pages, I wouldn't be surrounded by these talented people. But then also, if you're worth a damn, you recognize in the same moment that if I didn't have all these talented people here, I would have just a bunch of words on pages. And everyone at the table is an extraordinary, experienced storyteller, right? He tells stories with makeup, she tells stories with transpo, he tells stories with, it's just around the table, you're surrounded by skill and talent. And so that's why I love collaborating with directors. Some of my very closest friends in life are directors. Would I ever, every show I've run, I'm always scheduled at some point to direct an episode. I just have never managed to get there, just because it's so demanding, running a show. So it'll happen sooner or later, but there are people who are far better suited for it probably than I am. I just love the writing and the producing.
A yes with a lowercase y.
Yeah.
You mentioned that every time that you start a new script, it feels like the first time, even though you've written, countless scripts. I'm curious, can you break down for us, because the idea of sitting at a blank page is so intimidating to so many people. So I'd love to hear from you just kind of where your mindset is at, how it feels different every time, what process has come to you after all these years of experience where you're like, I can rely on this, but still let me stay flexible enough to make this a new thing.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I have to, as I said earlier with the taglines of it all, I have to crystallize for myself in the simplest terms, what is this really about? I will often then, because I have a great love for key art. I always have. I'm probably a frustrated graphic designer, or at least was one in another life. So I will often create key art for myself. It's just a little thing that I do that hardly anyone ever sees except for me, but it starts to make it feel real to me. It also, in a weird way, starts to create a beginning groundswell of self-induced pressure for my, it's like, it looks like a movie. It feels like it should be a movie, and therefore I better get busy writing that movie or that TV series. That's a part of the process for me. I think you're right about the daunting exercise of staring at a blank screen and a blinking cursor. I think one of the things that really helps me get past that each time, but also one of the things that can make it feel difficult each time until I've done this emotional math, is trying to figure out, no matter how wildly different the story or the characters at the heart of the story may be from me and my life, like, where is the common overlap of my humanity with theirs? What is universal about this journey? That once I can answer those emotional questions for myself, I again feel even more pressure to go ahead and try and wade my way through it. then it just becomes about, one other good thing about working on TV as long as I have is like you just get used to writing a lot really quickly, right?
Yeah.
So I do not look at every word as precious. I'm a 10 to 15 page a day guy minimum, and like I know that 5 days from now I'm going to have a rough draft, and it may be crap on paper, but at least I've got something, and then I'm gonna polish from there. Also, I'm pretty hardcore on myself about having a full, complete outline. I find that that's the most enjoyable process for me, because then I get to just lose myself in the pages and have fun and make new discoveries, but at least I have a roadmap for where I'm going.
What are you working on at the moment, if I may ask?
Well, I just 2 days before the strike turned in a new pilot to Netflix, which I can't talk too much about, but it's an international espionage thriller. Really fun to write, very challenging, but really fun to write.
Yeah, how do you learn about that stuff? Or like what type of research is it from a book? Yeah.
Deep research. It's based on a best-selling novel, so I had a 500-page book to adapt into a series and into a pilot. So I had to do also a format or a Bible for the series, and then the pilot. But it required an enormous amount of research. I've been doing a lot of international work lately as well. Yes, you said I was on 911 Lone Star, which is anything but international. That's
Texan.
That's all shot here in Los Angeles, and that was a fun literal theme park ride. It also reunited me for the first time since I was 16 years old with Rob Lowe, who's the star of that show.
Yep.
What a trip.
From the outside.
So that was full circle. But no, but what happened was in 2019, I think that's right, somewhere in there, I wound up, I ran a mini room for a Chinese American co-production for a TV series, and the process went so well that I then got a call from Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard and Brian Grazer's company, and they asked me if I would come and consult with them on a series that they wanted to produce locally in China with Chinese writers and actors and in Mandarin. And what I didn't know until I showed up to consult was that I was going to wind up working hand in hand with Ron Howard, which was a total bucket list experience for me.
Amazing.
Again, another Oklahoma boy, and that was amazing. But what that led to was me going to Beijing to run a room of 13 Chinese writers, which was an extraordinary experience. That led to then Amazon sending me to Mexico City to work on with an incredible array of Latin American filmmakers to help launch 5 or 6 series in those different countries. That then led to them sending me to Japan to do 6 launches there on different shows. Then I went to London to work on Middle Eastern shows. Then Netflix sent me to Germany at the beginning of the pandemic to help launch a series for them. All of that led me back to most recently working with Imagine again on launching a series called Taiwan Crime Stories, which is on Disney Plus in Asia right now. So I've had a great exposure to international storytelling, and which has blown a lot of the much needed dust, off
the
Hollywood way of approaching.
Fair.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's informed you in so many different ways, but how do you lead a room, like, in a summary of internationals that might not, I mean, they probably speak English, but yeah.
In the case of the first room I ran in Beijing, they actually didn't, or a few of them did, but most didn't. And so, we had translators in the room.
Okay.
So it takes a little longer to say what you're going to say, but whatever nerves I had going into that room on day one, within 30 minutes had all slipped away, because I very quickly recognized the fact that we all speak the international language of storytelling. And,
awesome.
And so that was really, really satisfying.
You seem like you're just like a very, I don't want to say just positive person, but like you're down for a challenge. You're down for like a new thing. And what we keep finding again and again, actually, with like speakers that are successful is they've been prepared for the opportunity that comes, and then they try one thing and it might not go well, but it leads to this, leads to that. And so I just want to say it's awesome to see.
No, thank you. But I do think that that's sort of a way to live your life, much less run your business, right? It's like life is, you get one shot at this, and you're constantly surrounded by not just opportunities, creatively or professionally, but just opportunities personally to hear people's stories. That's my jam, man. As a storyteller, like I love sitting in that room with people from Argentina who are telling me a story I've on the one hand never heard, but on the other hand, I've lived my own version of. And it's one of the things that always strikes me about storytelling in general. It's like, I don't know if either one of you guys are musicians, but there's 12 notes on a scale, 24 if you're playing Indian music maybe, but like we're all telling basically different versions of the same stories, right? And I find that beautiful, and it literally translates in every language, and so I love on the one hand how different everyone's individual life experience is and what we can all learn from that. On the other hand, I love how similar it is and how we are bonded through so much common experience in our humanity. So I'd never get tired of that. I'm always trying to find, like I said before, like, what is my way into this, or how do I connect to this emotionally, even if I've, never tried to recover a stolen painting in Warsaw.
No, especially when your genres that you've worked on are so specific, so many different things. That's not always the case for people. And for most actors as well, people want to do different type of stuff. Like you want a challenge, not only to not get typecast, but you want to work on good products and whatever that is, right?
Yeah, no question. You want it to feel authentic.
I would say, I think it should be required for all Western creators to try to like break out of the bubble of what we're so used to seeing, what kind of content we ingest. I mean, even specifically, I mostly deal within the horror space. That's my jam. And I found, like, even when the whole J horror thing was coming into swing, like, people hadn't seen those images before. People were terrified in a way that they had never been before, just because there was a different part of the world that was handling that genre in a different type of way.
Yeah, no question. It's funny you bring up the horror, because I was going to ask you about, didn't you direct a short called The Fisherman?
Yeah.
Am I making this up? No, I'm right. Okay, good. So I remember seeing a piece of key art for that somewhere online and being like, well, that looks creepy as hell. Having worked with at least one creepy fisherman myself in the I Know What You Did Last Summer franchise. I was interested to see.
I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad there's no shortage of creepy fishermen out there.
I got to say, I Know What You Did Last Summer. I mean, one of my favorite franchises of all time. I'm sure jumping on the sequel to that, the amount of pressure, maybe this wasn't your experience, but like something that you create an original versus something that has an established audience that people already love. Was there that extra layer of pressure going into that?
Yeah, there was, and there was more than I even was aware of at the time. Kevin Williamson wrote the original screenplay for the first film, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's a great moral conundrum, and it still holds up. So, I knew that I couldn't necessarily play from the same playbook because he had already sort of indulged in that moral conundrum. So I knew that it was going to have to, in some way, shape, or form, relate to, those past transgressions. But what I didn't know was that when I was building my take and when I was going in to pitch it at Mandalay and to the folks at Columbia, what I didn't know was that they had a competing writer at the same time, not just pitching, but when they hired me to write my script, they hired this other writer to write his script. And so I had no idea that as I was toiling away in the trenches, someone else was toiling away, and then they were ultimately going to decide from those two scripts. So his was set in New Orleans. It was a creepy, moody, sort of Louisiana bayou kind of story that would probably be closer to the great Alan Parker film Angel Heart. Whereas mine, kind of a no-brainer, Jennifer Love Hewitt and Brandy in bikinis on a tropical island. I just didn't know that I had competition. So I wound up winning that battle in the end, but but yeah, it was definitely, it's tricky in those situations. And I've worked on other features since then that are parts of franchises where you always feel like you owe a debt of some sort to the writers who came before you, but then you also have to make sure that it stands on its own.
For sure. Is there any advice that you have for people just starting out in the industry now? Obviously you have this great pitching class, which I think that's a vital skill. I'm so glad that SC even has a class like that. I'm now regretting going to Syracuse, but I'm curious, like starting out, going to the big open world here. Is there anything, I mean, how does someone kind of get to that next level? You had this shot, right place, right time, right opportunity. You were ready to go. Nowadays in the current landscape, is there anything that you would have done differently if you were starting right now?
I mean, the one thing that I would do the same, because I think that this just never goes away. And by the way, it applies to not just the entertainment business, but you just keep putting chips on the table. You recognize that, like, first of all, no matter who you're paying to represent you, you are always going to be your most effective and impactful representative. No one is ever going to sell you like you do, even if you're not comfortable with it, by the way. And I know that a lot of writers and directors, would rather focus their attention on the story they're trying to tell and not make themselves the story. Writers in particular, this is one of the things that I try to combat in my class at USC. It's like, your people don't always, for all the right reasons, by the way, feel so great about talking about themselves. But what they don't recognize until they start their careers is that you're going to spend 80% of your time doing what we're doing right now, which is talking, in order to, sit down in front of that blank screen. But I think putting chips on the table, is just, you have to keep generating material, not just to improve your skills with each at bat, but also to improve your chances of finally, lighting up somebody's interest. And that just comes out of that consistent work. And I don't think that changes. I think that we're, look, we are definitely in a really interesting place in this business right now. This is my second strike in my career. It is a very markedly different experience from the last one. In many ways, it feels less like a contract negotiation, even though, to be clear, that is what it is, and more like an existential battle for the future of the entertainment industry. And I know that that's stressful for people just starting out. I just taught my last, 2 classes of the semester for a class that has since graduated a couple of days after those finals. And I know that all of those students, even though all of my students tend to be nervous in the spring in particular, because the safety net's about to fall away and, they got to go make their own in Hollywood. But it's even more stressful right now, moving into a strike. Although, as I said to all my writing students, and this would apply to anybody who wants to be a director or an actor or all three of those things, like, you will never have a better time than you have right now, of meeting as an incredible array of talent all in one place than you'll have on these strike lines. Get out there and be supportive and strike up conversations, and you will be blown away by the talent you're surrounded by. But even, beyond that, yes, I recognize that it's never been more competitive. I recognize that, we now have literal robots competing with us as well. But I still say the same thing applies. You just keep putting chips on the table. You just keep writing. You keep shooting those shorts. You keep going to those auditions. You just keep building your skill sets and building your network. And then, yes, the stars will align. I don't mean to sound, like too much of a woo-woo cheerleader, but in my experience and in the experiences of people who have been, whose careers I admire deeply, the one thing that unites us all, I think, is just that instinct to just keep at it. It's a persistence game.
Keep pushing, creating.
Yeah. I love that answer, because it's something that everyone has within their control. It doesn't matter what climate it is or what time it is or whatever's going on. It's like
mediums change even. Yeah, the mediums change, whatever. You got to keep telling stories, keep going forward.
And I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and diversify, right? On that first day, on my first day in film school, when John Milius was the guest, and I got to walk him to his car and hear his war stories or whatever. You know, the first advice he gave, and thank God I didn't completely listen to it, but the first advice he gave was, if you want to be the best writer you can be, then you need to go get in fist fights in bars. You need to go jump on trains. You need to go travel the world. You need to go wait tables. You need to go. And basically what he was saying is, you need to go give yourself things to write about, right? You need to go live a life. And that is a critical part of it. But also it's another way of putting chips on the table. It's a way of diversifying. And Duke, I have a very clear memory of sitting at a coffee shop in Sherman Oaks, well over a decade ago. And your grandfather and your dad and some people were sitting at the table next to me, and they were meeting about dog food. I remember your grandfather was involved with a dog food brand, and I know this because we bought it for our golden retriever, right? And I remember being really impressed by that, because I love it when people live rich lives and diversify themselves in different ways and find, you know, different ways to not just put food on the table, but live your life in a rich, complete way and have different experiences, because again, it all feeds the same thing. You wind up with more stories to tell.
More life. I think it sounds so douchey, but I like to say I'm a creative entrepreneur now. Like I try to, a lot of irons in the fire. Jacob and I, that's our favorite thing. So I love that you said, and by the way, they did that my grandfather was the most, as I'm sure you probably know, was the most inspired about life and loved hearing people's stories. And he would go to breakfast every morning with all his friends, and they would just chat and gossip and the funniest stuff. So yeah,
I love that. Well,
and the pet food was great. Natural balanced pet food.
Yeah, man. I blanked on the name, but yes, you're right. And we never were without a giant bag of that for our golden retriever. So you know,
natural balance.
Not bad. Hey, by the way, real quick, do you remember? You might not. My mom's ex-fiance back in the day was Mark Berg. Jordan Berg.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I remember. I remember spending a week in Cabo with Mark Berg. That was a very interesting experience.
I was probably there. Yes, in all the best ways. But I was dying laughing about like talk with you and everything, all of this, because it's such a small world that's all connected.
Well, that's what I always say to my students, right? Like, I grew up in a small town. I know what a real small town is, but there's no smaller town than the entertainment industry. So you wind up working with everyone, for everyone, vice versa by the time you're out of this. So I never get tired of that. I never get tired of these sorts of connections either, where it's like, oh yeah, you know my daughter, or oh yeah.
True that. Yeah, no, you guys are all so sweet. All right, my man. Thank you so much. Let's please keep in touch. I'm going to send you the link and stuff to this if we may, and we're going to post it everywhere if we may, if you're okay with that.
Of course. My pleasure. Yeah, let me know, and I will try to push it on my end as well.
This was a great conversation. Really great meeting you, man.
Likewise. I appreciate the time, and you guys keep on keeping on. Stay in touch.